Hello and welcome. In today's video, we are going to be going over dungeons. First kind of dungeon we're going to talk about is the prize plunder dungeon. This type of dungeon, you can play once, I believe for free, just from like a tutorial perspective. Raster will show up and tell you things you may or may not already know. But after that, the way that you're going to find prize plunder dungeons is this spot right here. I'm doing the end of my tutorial version right now. So this spot right here, sometimes you'll get a plunder pass. When you get that, you have until the next daily deals, so for me an hour and 45 minutes, you have until then to go ahead and complete this prize plunder dungeon, and I highly recommend you do so. The prize plunder dungeons give seriously good rewards for just a relatively small amount of time. The other thing to know about these dungeons is that they use your currently selected battle deck when you start the dungeon. And it doesn't matter what level any of your cards are, they will be set to level 4 for the duration of this dungeon. And only inside this dungeon. So as you can see, it says resume. Dungeons can be a little bit long, so I've already done a bunch of it to kind of speed things up. First thing you might notice that's different is there are 4 bosses. Each prize plunder dungeon only has 1 floor, and it has 4 different bosses, 1 for each element. What is incredible about this is that each of these boss rooms have an individual chance to contain a legendary boss. So it's totally worth it to just check them all out. Try and find, and for me in this case, I did get really lucky. This account's first prize plunder dungeon, so this is the boss we're going to go for. The other thing you'll notice when you do a prize plunder dungeon on your own is there are 3 of these 4x4 prize rooms and just the 4 dungeon bosses, and that's it. So let's jump into this and see what one of these prize rooms look like. They are sort of the bulk of a prize plunder dungeon. So the devs have posted that first of all, these are the prize games. There's 8 chests, each one has 100 gold, and to unlock a chest, all you simply need to do is, treat these sides like cards, right? If you can capture them, you'll destroy the lock. The devs have said that there are more than one way, to solve these. Like, they're always solvable. Sometimes there are spots, like this one was a 7. You'll find that there's some cards that sort of have to go in a certain spot. So like after placing that there, this 6 here, the only card I have that can beat it is Maple. The other thing you should know when doing these is that no abilities trigger or activate. If you have something like Upper Hand, or Power Up, or Avatar for that matter, like they won't trigger. So don't expect those to activate and help you out. Like I said, these usually really aren't that hard. It just takes a little bit of planning, like a little bit of just looking at the board, and you should be able to take care of it. And then after each one of these prize games, you'll choose one of 3 cards. One of these 3 cards has a ×2 multiplier on it, like that, and then it doubles the reward you get for that room. Not for your whole dungeon run, just that room. So that's it. You'll just want to take time, get familiar with those prize rooms. That's the fastest way I know of to make 800 coins in this game. And then this is it, really. You just dive right into the boss fight. And I always check the boss battle, the deck, because what I'm looking for are certain abilities like Ally mainly. Mainly want to be on the lookout for Ally. Because that changes the strategy I open with a little bit. But the thing that's really nice about these prize plunder dungeons, as opposed to other dungeons, is that you get to keep your cards. You get to use your cards. I'm just going to start by... I know my opponent's playing a fire deck, so I just want to cover some of these tiles up. And you also do get to play these at quite an advantage, because these cards... Yours are all level 4, and so I was just thinking, and the boss still has half level 2 and half level 1 cards. Darn. So anyway, these fights, I don't know, you kind of just want to do them. They're not super hard. They're not totally free either, but I have yet to really have a hard time with these dungeon bosses in prize plunders. And that's really it. Again, I got super lucky. I'm not sure on the exact odds. I definitely wouldn't expect to see this, like, see a legendary card or a legendary boss in every plunder dungeon you do, but you get 4 chances at it. So that's a plunder dungeon for 3 prize battles and 1 boss fight. This is an incredible amount of reward. So make sure you're checking your shop every day for those plunder passes. So next up we have the Quick Crawl Dungeon, which I think is sort of the staple. It's the dungeon I would recommend. I will explain a lot more in depth as to elemental dungeons versus quick crawls when I go through the elemental dungeon, because there's a bit left to do on that one. But here again, I've left just a little bit of this dungeon left over because otherwise they can get quite lengthy. So these dungeons, the prize plunders have 3 fights. These quick crawls right now, in the current patch, they have 4 battles. There's 2 of these 3x3s and 1 4x4. So before I jump into that, these dungeons have keys and locks, or rather 1 key, many locks. You can click on these and the chest rooms will tell you what you get. You get 50 coins, 10 rare cards, I believe it's 50 common cards, and it should be 2 epics. Now, these, for whatever reason, I don't think they're exact values. Maybe they will be patched to become exact values, but at least for the time being, like I said, applies to the current patch. I'm going to recommend you always get the epic chest. As you can see, we get 70 coins, we get a couple abyss orbs, and that was not listed on the chest, and it said 2 copies, but we ended up getting 5. So I'm not sure if that's unintended or intended, or if these values are sort of like a guide, you'll get approximately that. I'm not really sure. All I know is right now, the epic chests are, in my opinion, the most worth it. So these 3x3 fights, which are the fights that make up over half of the quick crawl dungeons, they're pretty easy, and this is the general strategy that I go with, as I try to make my life as easy as possible. Like, I want weak side showing. Sure, I could have played that there and had stronger numbers, but what I really want is I want it to be easy for me to recapture these cards. That one's got a 5 there. Good enough. So whenever you're placing a card or considering a move, all you really want to be, at least for these Dungeon Lackey fights. For the Lackey fights, again, that's, oh boy, I just got hit by ally, but for these fights, that's all I would really be concerned about, is making sure that you can reclaim the cards that you're putting down. These kind of fights, I would consider like 7 to 2 a good result. 6 to 3, yeah, that's fine. That's okay. Here at the prize selection screen, I don't know which card that is. For some reason that's not loading, but basically Quick Crawl Dungeons only have 4 battles. So I don't typically recommend replacing cards in your deck. You can see I have a couple leveled up, but I really don't think it's a good idea to, say, take this card and replace one in my deck with it, because replacing a card in your deck, trying to see if it, yeah. The dungeon tutorial says a little bit about it. When you level up a card, you actually will permanently, after the dungeon, permanently gain copies of this card that you leveled up. And that does apply to cards that you add to your deck and then level up, but actually taking one of the 4 battles you'll have in a quick crawl to add a card to your dungeon deck. You just, if you're really looking for that card, you'd have to get lucky and see that card again and then be able to level it up. So I want to know what this card is. Oh, okay. It's just that one that's not loading. But otherwise, the boss doesn't have allies, so I'm not that concerned. And we can just apply the same strategy where you start off playing in corners and make your cards easy to recapture. Oh gosh. Sure am dropping frames. Let's just close that and reopen it real quick. I am running this on PC using the Nox emulator, and I guess that happens every once in a while. The game will slow down, so it just requires a quick reboot. You get back in the game pretty quick. Awesome. So right back where we left off. And yeah, I definitely could have played some Earth cards, but the thing is, especially early on in any given match, you really should expect your cards to be recaptured. So, it just, for me, under that line of thinking, I want to... Okay, I expected my card to get recaptured. But generally, yeah, I just want to make my cards as easy on myself to recapture as possible. I'm a little scared that that might be a bait or something, so I'm just going to play there. Yeah, I'm a little thrown off. I don't really know where to play next because of this. Yeah, okay. That's fine with me. And so now this might seem like I'm leaving myself open to a difficult recapture, but I mean, he didn't even take the cards, so... Normally dungeon boss fights don't really go that well, this well for me. Like, they go well, but 13 is pretty good. As you'll see, you get extra gold the more you win. So, like, you can win just 9 to 8, and that'll sort of net you a win just barely. But the better you do, the more gold you'll get. So now here, when choosing a reward, I'd say I recommend taking new cards, or upgrading things to level 2, level 3. Until you're really familiar with the game, I would say you probably don't want to upgrade stuff to level 3 because it's quite an investment, or level 4. But it is up to you, whatever you want to do. But especially when starting out, you really just want to flesh out your card collection and get as many different cards as you can. Yeah, so you can see I'm actually pretty close to finishing that card collection already, and this account is like 2 days old. So last but not least, we have elemental dungeons. These things cost 100 orbs. They are awesome, but I think you need to know when to use them and when to go for them. These elemental dungeons have 2 prize rooms. They have 2 dungeon boosters, or water boosters in this case because it's a water dungeon. They have 2 safes, and they have 2 boss fights. Now, in an elemental dungeon, there is a higher chance of getting a legendary in one of your boss rooms. And that's per room. You get 2 of those chances, kind of similar to prize plunder dungeons. I'm going to jump in and do this one first. And I know we already did plunder dungeons in this video, but I wanted to show you that this is kind of different. I would save these prize plunders until halfway towards the end of your dungeon, simply because you see these zeros here. This doesn't apply to a prize plunder dungeon because all your cards get set to level 4, but in a regular dungeon run you'll often get cards in your starting deck that have zeros somewhere on them, because they start at level 1 and there's a lot of cards that show a 0. So with all that being said, basically what I'm getting at is if you have a 0 sitting next to this 0, it will not capture it. So in elemental dungeons, don't do these prize games until you've eliminated all the zeros, I guess except for 10, in your dungeon deck. It might sound complicated, or maybe I just took too long to explain it, but I think it is quite important. I think you can kind of just do the same thing. Look around for some of these high cards that you might only have 1 or 2 answers for. Get those out of the way, and then the rest of your decision making becomes a lot easier. Definitely feel free to take your time on these, because there is no, against any of the AI, there's never an in-game timer. And this is really good money. Like, in terms of in-game economy, prize rooms are fantastic. Yeah. I will say though that overall, if you're looking for copies of common cards, sometimes this applies to rares. Rares are sort of a middle ground, but if you're looking for copies of common cards and coins, quick crawl dungeons are definitely your best way to go. So we don't want to do that boss fight yet. We'll jump over here and open this. There's 2 of these in each elemental dungeon, and they operate pretty much just like a regular booster that you can buy in the shop. They'll always have some commons, couple rares, an epic, and they can contain a legendary. It's like a 1% chance. I think I've been playing this game for like half a year, and I think I've only had that happen once from a booster. But still, it's a possibility. So yeah, again, I could be making some strong cards, I could be making some technically way stronger plays, but the truth is, I don't really want to, because I want these things to be easy for myself to recapture. Actually, I still think this is my best move. I might lose this card here, or this one. That works really well for me. Yeah, we'll do that instead. Oh, darn. Up until that moment, I would have been able to retake that card. It's not too bad. So the elemental dungeons do have a lot more of these 4x4 Dungeon Lackey fights, which do take a little bit more time. So now in these dungeons, in these cases, I'd consider it a lot more worthwhile to grab a card. Yeah, let's grab this one. Sorry, to grab a card as a reward and swap it out for something in your deck as opposed to just strictly leveling it up. And the reason for that is these dungeon safes, which we will use right after this next battle. I'll explain them though. The dungeon safes, you can take any card that you currently have in your dungeon deck. You have to have it, but if you do... Oh, I wanted to play that. If you do drop a card in the safe, for example, if it's common, at the end of the dungeon run you'll get 50 copies of that card. Or if it's a... Listen, I believe rares are 10 copies of the card and epics are 2 copies of the card. So it's definitely a non-trivial amount. I want that one. I think this is the only way I can get it. See if this ends up working out for me. I'm hoping my opponent does not play directly above this crunchadile. Okay. Oh, and he had a reason to. So close. But still, it's not bad. You also can just take gold, which I have done sometimes, but here, you also get, in these elemental dungeons, there's so many more battles that there's a lot more opportunity to level up, like to select a card, add it to your dungeon deck, and then to level that card up. Which of course will reward you with copies of that card. So here's the dungeon safes. The text here really tells you everything you need to know. And you just sort of have to pick one. But I'm going to pick this one. I do tend to prefer, when choosing rewards in a dungeon, I do tend to prefer ability-based cards. Simply because when you start a dungeon, that starting dungeon deck that you get will never have any abilities. It'll always be basic, what we'd call vanilla cards. So prioritizing selecting these as rewards, I think is a better choice simply because cards like this started in my dungeon deck and I've got it to level 3. So it's just easier to get copies of those sort of cards. Uh-oh. I might be losing frames again. Yeah, I am. I might have to tweak some settings. So my apologies, but just bear with it at least to the end of this video, and I'll hopefully have it figured out in future videos. Because let's see, we used a safe, we have this... Yeah, we have this fight, and then just a boss fight. And that will wrap up all 3 types of dungeons. Oh man, this keeps happening to me. It's kind of rough. And there you go. So I always wait to use safes like till the very end, simply because there's always a chance you get another card that you want, right? Even in the very last battle, prior to a boss fight, you could find a new card that you've really been looking for, and you can stash that in a dungeon safe. And the dungeon safes always give, except in the case of epics, they give, I believe, enough copies to get a card to level 2. So I know I already have 10 copies of this sitting in a safe. That's a pretty good card. I could use some more of that. And then we can simply pick between these two. So what I usually look out for is this card right here, like an ally card. Boss battles, in my opinion, that have ally cards are harder. So if there isn't a huge difference for me between one or the other, then I will pick the boss fight that doesn't have the ally ability. Because then you can just play the corner strat, not worry about it, just focus on recapturing your own cards up until the middle towards the end of the battle. And it almost always works out just fine for me. Because yeah, even though I know I could make a pretty strong card here, against these dungeon bosses especially, I think it's just safe to assume they have something strong enough to take your card. And they usually do. I was kind of hoping my opponent would play there, because this is kind of my only way to retake both this card and that one. Mind you, again, it's safe to assume that your opponent will be able to recapture your cards. Now, you don't always have to flip one of your opponent's cards. In this case, it's a much better idea for me to do so, because I believe my opponent's likely to play there. Yeah. So yeah, these dungeon boss fights, they just have stronger cards, so they typically are a more difficult fight, but they're still totally doable. Yeah, if you have any questions about any of the dungeons, let me know in the comments. Or especially head to the Discord for Creatures of Aether. Feel free to find me in there, ask questions, in general chat. There's a lot of useful pinned messages, things like that. And again, when selecting a reward, I usually try and opt for prioritize any cards with abilities. And at least when I'm starting early on, I will take commons usually, at least till like level 2 or level 3, simply because commons are so much cheaper than everything else to upgrade. And this brings me to my final point. So you can see comparatively to the results we got from the quick crawl dungeon, for every one elemental dungeon run you do, you could have afforded 4 quick crawl dungeons. But it's pretty clear to see that because of these elemental, like the boosters in the dungeon, and the safes, you have a lot more opportunity to get a variety of cards, huge variety, as well as you have a lot higher of a chance, like if you're looking to build a specific deck or you're after something in specific, it's way better to choose an elemental dungeon simply because you go through like 14 fights almost tracking down that card, and then you can put copies of that card in the safe. That's about it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.